going live. Once it does, I'll still talk about the fact that it's going live. And we'll cue the music. Everyone out there can sing along. They all know the words. I can pretend that I can fade it down seamlessly. Makes it easier to talk about it. And see that? See that? It's always louder to us than it is on the broadcast. That's very hard to accommodate. So, yeah. Hey, everybody, all you brainiacs out there, welcome back to The Broken Brain. I am super excited and honored today to have Abi Perez with me, the founder, creator, host, and CEO. We were just talking about that, Joe. The founder of the of Friends, Amigos de Amigos podcast.
Yes.
Did I say that right? Okay, good.
Yes.
But and I had to search it under both names because to find it, and that was where I thought it was pretty cool. We'll get into some of the things of the cultural aspects of your podcast and how exciting that is. But most of all, I'm just excited to have you join it today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's exciting. This is my first guest opportunity, so thank you for that.
Oh, cool. So You just have to remember that that it all started here. It all started on your podcast, actually, but all of the guesting that you're going to be doing out there. When I see you on like CNN or whatever, hopefully you remember that the Broken Brain was the first.
I'll remember Dwight and the Broken Brain.
Goes from the Broken Brain to CNN. That's usually actually how it goes for most of the guests on here. Well, tell everybody a little. I mean, I'll say just what I know about you is you've created the Friends of Friends podcast. You're an expert in conflict, empathy, conflict resolution, mediation. Seems to be a lot of the things that you're talking about. And I was also really impressed in the podcast group where I saw you kind of sharing some stuff at first, is that you do a lot of focus on mental health awareness amongst the Mexican American community as well. And things like that. So all that's very exciting, but go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
I am from Mexico myself, and then I moved here to the US when I was about 4 years old. So back then I was in Texas, and it was still bilingual, Spanish and English. So I'm very comfortable speaking Spanish and English, but in all the places that I've been, just in that Hispanic community, I didn't really see a lot of mental health awareness. It wasn't very championed. In fact, it was almost dismissed as like it's kind of like a needy thing or something that doesn't really matter. So it's always been very interesting to me, just because I've been a people watcher my whole life. So I see the benefits of it, and I think it's important to share all that information.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing that I see just all over, not just in one community or the other, but, I was just talking earlier today with a therapist and another clinician who run a detox facility. And we were kind of talking about this, of how there's that stigma that has come from years and years of not understanding what psychological illness is, what mental health is, what addiction. And of course, we were talking about in their case as well. Working with that as they do. And the thing that hit me, I was thinking about it, is when your symptoms of a condition involve the way that you act and the way that you think and the way that you feel. I was thinking those are three things that we sort of use to evaluate or judge others and even ourselves. Right. And so I don't know if that's where some stigma comes from, but what do you see as you're talking to people about it?
Yeah, just in my community alone, from working in places where we had bilingual people just all around. I've worked in call centers as well, and there was a lot of Spanish-speaking community, and they just see it as, they see their bad moods, their mental health as being real. Like, I'm just being real. This is myself. You have to take me as I am. And so it's, commendable, but there's an easier way of living your life. You don't have to run into all these issues. You don't have to, be okay with being rude or things like that. It's more so that we're just not empathetic with ourselves. We didn't teach that, like in school. Nobody even gets it, not even just my own community. I think it's really, really important to teach people emotional awareness in general, just because we're not prepared for that. And that is definitely something we need, for the future and for any stage of our lives. They say that like by the time you hit 30, then you start seeing a lot of these symptoms from like, you know, bipolar or just mental health symptoms just increase by the time you're after your 20s. So nobody's equipped for that. They just think, man, it's just getting harder. So
Yeah.
while it is, there's a lot of solutions. You could talk to a therapist and figure it out that way. But a lot of people think, no, I just want to keep that to myself, or they think it's, you know, it's very invasive to share all that information. We're just not vulnerable, I guess, as a community anymore.
Do you find that to be particularly true within the mix between the Mexican and the American? Meaning, is there difficulty trusting the system? I guess with the cultural factor of being immigrating into a country, especially maybe a country that isn't always very friendly.
Yeah, I mean, well, even just the stigma, really, I mean, on medication. I mean, just that alone, they think we see all those ads on TV, and as Hispanics or even just my culture, they go, why am I going to have this thing that does, you know, it'll make me suicidal, it'll make me all these things. And those are side effects, but everything has a side effect. I think, unfortunately, as my culture has just, they're more popular for, I'll just drink this away, or I will, you know, party all night to forget about this. That's more of a solution, but you know, that's okay if you want to go and do that, but it's essentially you're just avoiding, you know, really fixing the core issues.
That's the interesting thing is you see that because like you see both extremes in culture, and I see that, you know, family history and just in culture where I've grown up of either you see the addictive measures people take of like, I'll handle it myself, or on the other hand, there's a different direction. It's still addictive, but the suppression of those things, I'll just keep it all inside and just sort of lash either outward or inward with the world around me. And that's still very self-destructive, but yet it's all under that I'll handle it myself kind of thing. I like how you mentioned that.
Yeah. That's the one thing that's challenging, because even as a parent, it's hard to break that cycle even for our own kids, because they start doing it and you see that they're, you know, I will always champion going and talking to a therapist or even just a counselor at school, just because that's kind of how I started being open about my needs. I came to a whole new country where my parents had no idea, or my grandparents had no idea how to guide me through the school system. So my biggest resource was going to the front desk, and I was like, what's happening now? What do I need to do? And all those people were super friendly. They helped me, you know, get through school, but it wouldn't have been through my family. They didn't know. And so it's really hard. Huh?
Yeah. Oh, I just was that you found that you had to be the go-between, the liaison for that kind of stuff, or just the one doing it, the one finding
Yeah, I had to go and figure out if I really wanted to match my peers, you know, that their parents went to college or they had that example. I didn't, so I had to be like, how is so-and-so doing that? How do I get to do what they're doing? Because I wanted to try to be as, you know, have the opportunities that they had.
That's a tremendous amount of wherewithal, though, at that age to go and do that yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and it was, I grew up in a very religious home. And so in a church, you see how the community helps each other. Like there was a lot of times where the community had to sell food, tamales, tacos, whatever, so that we can raise money. And so I was never shy of, you know, talking to people and, you know, figuring out how to do stuff, especially because I had to be the translator for my family as well. So I was never scared of going and talking to, I knew that unfortunately my family didn't age.
Because I was just, because, you know, it's interesting as you're saying that, I was just thinking about the difficulties of that and how that would be intimidating and scary at the same time. And I'm not saying it wasn't, because it sounds like maybe it was sometimes, but you also had some, I guess, the advantage of experience of doing it. It's interesting. So like some of the family and culture and everything also, it's the strength helped to counterbalance with that too, because you saw that example of help and reaching out to each other within.
Yeah,
it's been ways. Like,
right. And even just in that form of like how you said that, it reminds me that my culture, the way that we talk to each other, and I've seen it also in American families, but more so in my own, is that we love each other by insulting each other. And so we're like, you little mother, da, da, da. And so in learning that, I learned that me asking other people, they never treated me that way. And so I was more comfortable asking strangers about my needs because of that, which is, very backwards in my mind, but it worked for me.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, nobody out there was sarcasming me or sarcastic remarks about it. They were just giving me the answers. So
what was it that got you thinking about things differently then, as far as things with mental health and psychological issues differently than maybe some others that you could have, the things you could have thought?
Yeah, no, I had very relationships with my parents, with my grandparents, and so I saw them through all those things. They got the needed. My grandpa and my biological dad, and so their behaviors, I saw that they would be very vulnerable to their friends or even among siblings. They were never open directly to each other about the things that they had in their heart. I just don't know. I saw them suffer through that. They got died, and at the very end, when they were these things, and so to me, it was like, why are you doing this? You guys had all this time. And we, like I told you, we were in a church scenario, and so many people were vulnerable, but they never decided. They always wanted to be the strong person, or they always wanted to, keep that facade. And so, especially in men, it's very sad because they, you guys experience all the same things we do. Unfortunately, we keep different standard. And by seeing all those things, it just made me not, I don't feel ashamed of like saying, hey, you're hurting my feelings. Let's talk about it. Because in fact, when I open up those conversations, if somebody goes, oh, I don't want to, to me, it just goes, perfect. I did my, if you don't want to talk about it, then, that means you didn't want to. It almost gives me like a relief that it's not on me, holding up that relationship or that situation.
That's a really interesting insight that you mentioned there, to say, if I've done what I can do, then there's that piece from that. I think a lot of times we focus on the before and during, like when we project ourselves like forward in our head of like, I got to have this hard conversation. It's like the before anxiety, I focus on that, or the during, it's going to be so hard. You're talking about kind of anticipating the after, of going like, oh, that's over. I had the conversation.
Yeah, like I'm more than happy to, hear anybody out. And so it was just things like I mentioned, just seeing in a church how people are so open about, talking to this being that, you have to have faith in it. I don't see it. To me, it was very natural to go, well, if you're so intimate with this spiritual being, why are we with people that are around us, our family? It's very strange that way. And so I try to just, navigate through even my own anxiety, because I have a lot of anxiety on even just being social. I don't go out. I don't talk to a bunch of people. I stick to my work. And that's a lot of it because, for me, it's just hard to even understand, like, going out, and a lot of people are on their phones right now, or they just, they're not very social. It takes a lot for people to be vulnerable now. And so the 2 or 3 friends that I've got, you hold them very close, but it's very rare that you can have multiple or big groups of people where you're vulnerable anymore.
There's a real balance there, isn't there, between vulnerability and control of that vulnerability. So that's interesting, as you're talking about that contrast of the social anxiety, and then also on the other hand, the part of like the community. And it sounds like that was one thing you took away from your upbringing, particularly that religious aspect, was the sense of community and investment, to where it sounds like maybe certain types of vulnerability, not okay, but certain types of vulnerability expected in a community setting, like what you're talking about. Does that make sense? Like we all pitch in and help each other, but we don't talk about it if I'm depressed.
Yeah. It's almost like the feelings part is taboo, especially in a religion. It was very much so, oh, well, leave it to God. It's in his hands. And to me, I was like, okay, but it's okay and healthy for us to talk about it. Like, that's also very helpful. And I didn't learn that, talking about it was helpful until I met my boyfriend now. And he is very much just open, vulnerable, and he taught me how about just anything. Because to me, as a woman, even I was always like, oh, I don't want to burden you with information. Oh, I don't want to stress you out. Maybe it's just a mood. I'm probably PMSing, I don't know. But I always made some sort of excuse, even myself. And then he was just like, no, it actually impacts, you. I think that maybe you're having a bad day and I want to help. And so even just that, like, I'm doing a disservice by holding it in, thinking, oh, maybe it's just nothing. Not because the people around me care. The people around me want to help me. They want to listen to me. And that's really helpful. That was a new perspective where it shows me how a healthy relationship could be. And then we both have that exchange. And sometimes I can be completely depressed, or I can just feel that numb feeling. And even talking about it, there's some sort of weight lifted of just having a conversation and going back and forth. Just action helps. And so that's very fascinating to me, that even in church, where people, like you said, are very vulnerable out, helping each other out, building each other as a community, that stigma is pushed aside because God's got it. And I'm sure he's got it. There's a lot of really good intentions in many religions, that it's also very smart to use your humans around you as a resource, because you don't know, their empathy might be life-changing. There was something that, even in my culture, this was something that really changed my mind. And that's why I started even opening up more, and it became more real for me to be more vulnerable about anything, because I used to rush home and make dinner. And as a Mexican woman, I would be like, I have to have dinner at this time. And it would stress me out, and I would be rushing and whatever. And one day my boyfriend was like, I don't even care if you make dinner at the same time. You could even just tell him, I'll buy dinner. Like, don't do that to yourself. And just even in that small thing, he like lifted this whole cultural nonsense that I had about expecting dinner at a specific time. And it's so silly, you don't think about it, but nobody said that to me out loud. And so I always had that little negative voice thinking, oh, an expectation, because otherwise I'm not a good partner. And that wasn't his perspective of a good partner. His perspective of a good partner is being vulnerable and just communicating. And
It's
so in all those
interesting.
things, it's really cool to learn that, people are more open about the stuff than you would expect.
So you really ran into that, like you said, no one ever told you, hey, be home at this time and get this done or whatever. It was just something that you kind of got by osmosis.
Yeah, just because in my mind, like I told you, my grandma raised me, and she was very much like, we have to have dinner at this time, and the house better be clean before the man of the house gets here, and all these weird little things. And unfortunately, you don't think that that's something you're going to do, but it's things that you are doing mindlessly. And so because we don't check ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we even judge ourselves then, even if we're not. Now, would you have said that you consciously embraced different values? Like if someone had said to you, hey, do you think it's your job as a woman to be home at this time before you can get your dinner ready for your man? Would you have said, yeah, absolutely, I totally think that consciously all the time? Or would you have had different beliefs you would have thought you were operating under?
I would have, and I would have said, I would love to do that. That'd be great, but even in my own, I had really too high of an expectation for myself. Like I was driving at least like 3 hours a day at that time. And so because my whole life scheme changed, I didn't stop to even say, hey, my day-to-day isn't working the same way. You just get into the habit of that. And so how many things are we doing that we are just accidentally in the habit of, that are causing us to get stressed out or frustrated?
Sure. And that's what I guess. Yeah, exactly. That makes more sense the way you said it. It's just that, we may even internalize or have expectations that are different of like, oh no, I'm actually pursuing this. It's like, well, you're not doing that. You're doing this, I am. Oh my gosh. Sometimes those things kind of linger around. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in your podcast, you talked about some of your own career path that you've gone through. And one of the things that stood out to me was working as a stylist. And this is for maybe just my personal backstory of I've never have been a stylist. Totally, that'd be cool, I guess, if I was, but I used to work at a tech college. And when I worked there, I worked a lot with the cosmetology program. And at the same time, I was doing some training to be a counselor, and I was working there as kind of like a school counselor, right? And it was very interesting to me because I noticed that there was a lot of similarities between what I did and what the stylists in training were doing too, right? Is that it was a
Yeah.
service industry. There was a lot of vulnerability with the clientele. And there were just things that I thought really stood out to me as being very similar and those things. And so it was interesting when you said that, because that feeling, I hadn't thought about it in a long time. It just came rushing right back.
Yeah, no, that's one of my most favorite parts that I've done in my career. Because after that I moved into IT, but
Right.
the one-on-one with people like that, it also showed me that there's a lot of different ways of, choosing to live life. That also helped me
Mm-hmm.
as I was growing up, because I did hair throughout my 20s. And it was very interesting because I was a super young mom. I was 18 when I had my kids, 19. And so just seeing all these people that I helped out, whether it was like retired women with successful careers or men that were working, there was always something different in their life, and that was for them. Or it taught me, hey, this is something that maybe I could do, or something that, if this person tells me their life as they're sitting down, it makes it more reasonable, I guess, than reading it in a book or reading it in a blog or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It's just, it made a lot of those things a lot more possible.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, like I said, in my family background, I don't think my parents got past the third grade. I don't think that, there was a lot of resources like that. And so I would have never had that exposure without having to have that. Like, it was mandatory to talk to people about nothing. So it was just a lot of really cool conversations. And it taught me, like, hey, this is not the only way to continue with your life. You can do a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I think people think that social anxiety or even shyness, first of all, they think social anxiety is the same thing as shyness, which it isn't. But I think people make a mistake of thinking that people who have a social anxiety don't want to talk to people. But that's totally wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's more so that I don't know when to inject myself into a conversation. That is one of my biggest problems, because I'll hear people or I'll see people that even they look like they're struggling to have a conversation. So I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that. It's just
Yeah.
overthinking it. It's like when I was a kid, I would talk to anybody, like I said, just because I didn't have a filter. I didn't care. I was just, so I don't know. I was in a church environment and I didn't ever think about it. But as I saw how people were judgy, and I saw how people were very discriminatory about different things, there's then a thing that grows in you that is more like, maybe it's not a good time to put yourself out there, or maybe it's not a good time to. That's why I champion a lot of empathy in my podcast, because whether you're being funny or sarcastic or whatever, you don't know how much it took for that person to come and talk to you. You don't
Yeah.
know how much it took for that person to come and even say anything, because they have all this conditioning where they have insecurities around this stuff. And so social anxiety, like you said, is not necessarily being shy. It's more so that you question how you're going to come off. You question how, that whole thing is going to go, because you're unfortunately stuck thinking like all these things have gone kind of poorly in the past. And that's something that, as an IT consultant, as a cosmetologist, I stuck to very core things. I asked people, hey, so how about your family? Or how about those things? Like, never ever sounded fake. People were very genuine about those things. But I have my 2 or 3 topics that if I am in a customer service environment, I won't veer out of that, because I try to keep it not only professional but easy on myself.
Mm-hmm. There's a level of self safety is really,
Yeah.
and that's part of what anxiety is about too, is trying to be safe. I like when you mentioned that about what it takes for somebody to open up, and with that empathy that you've formed of understanding that from the other side, from both sides, really, of saying, what does it take for somebody to open up? Um, it's almost like if we were able to give ourselves permission in a way. Like, what do you find are some of the barriers people have to opening up?
Well, right now, social media is everybody look perfect in a way. I mean, I have still people that I talk to, and the trend right now is very like self, and I don't understand that. They're like, oh, I my this, or oh, I'm so this, or my skin Botox or whatever, and I'm like, no, why? This doesn't have to even be the conversation. Let's talk about, I don't know, anything else. There was a lot of like physical that I don't understand. And when people talk about that, then it makes me, as an anxious person, I think, well, looking at me in that way, do they think? But honestly, people aren't.
Yeah.
They're just thinking about themselves, you know? And so for
Right.
me, I've had to come to learn that. But for people that have anxiety just because, you know, they just started experiencing that, or maybe suffer from PTSD, I think if you think, you know, you're being degraded yourself, what are you thinking about me? That's also something that, you know, when people say, oh, even in work meetings, people will be like, oh, I'm so dumb, or oh, da da da, and I'm just like, no, you're not. Don't say that. Like, it's fine. This is what we're just being. And so even in those things, I'm like, when I've had my really depressed days or my hard days where I'm struggling, those are like, holy, you're dumb. You know, what over here? And so I just so condition myself even more and more not talk about myself that way, or when somebody is doing that to me, just go, I'll even just be like, no, just I don't even know what to say, or I'm just no, because it's just you know, for that person because they might be having a bad day.
Mm-hmm. That's you've focused a lot on empathy on your podcast, and it sounds like just overall in your life, your career, and stuff. What does empathy mean to you? How would you define that for people?
I just accepting people how they are. Thinking of what they look like or their social status or anything. Just because like I said, there's a lot of cool things to learn from religions, like accepting everybody and their condition and whatever. The coolest story was, you know, for me that Jesus defended some sort of prostitute. I was like, my God talks crap about these ladies all the time. But in my mind, I was like, didn't, you know, and it was very strange to me because grandpa ironically would talk. One time we drove by a strip club and I was like, yeah, I knew it was. I was just trying to see what he would tell me because I was a teenager by then. And he was like, no, don't even talk about that. Don't even ask. This is a place of sin. And in my mind, I was like, sir. But I knew from him that he had multiple relationships with different women from the church. And so to me, I was always like, just be accepting, man. It's almost crazy that you're this judgmental just because you have one idea and you are another person. Like, it's fine. So in my mind, I saw him as being very like cartoonish, but also I saw him as being a regular person, and I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot how to ask for raises at work. I learned a lot how to, you know, be very like, this is what I need to do and hire me because I'm good at this. I learned to be very direct in those ways, but in other ways I was like, oh my gosh, you're out of your mind. this doesn't make sense. It was almost like a cartoon. And so in those things you learn like everybody's got some sort of challenge. Everybody's got some sort of thing that they struggle with, but it's just easier to be accepting of what you like. And if something you don't like about that person, you don't have to decide. Like, that's why boundaries exist, you know. Also, my grandma, she's been wheelchair ridden her whole life, and people would look at her in a very awkward way, and people would treat her very differently, as if she was deaf almost, when she wasn't deaf. She was just in a wheelchair. So it was very strange to me to see people be like overly kind. And they were so kind that it was almost insulting. And so just all those weird dynamics. I just always treated people like, you're a person, I'm a person. And that's what it is. And that's how I want to be treated too. So
it is weird what we bring to it. I just had an interview just the other day. It hasn't come up on the podcast feed yet, but it will, with Kristen Lopez, who is she's a journalist that writes about film and things, and talking about media. She's also a disability rights advocate and is a wheelchair user. And we talked a little bit about that people put that on there and they wouldn't think they're being like that. They're discriminating by being like, oh, you're just great. And it's like, why am I great? Why are you assuming that I'm great? Or why are you talking to me like I'm a child? Or why, you know, those kinds of things where, and it is interesting because that is a lack of empathy, right? It's an imposition of what I think is polite, but it is not empathy because I'm not treating the person as a person at that level. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people not look at her in the face. They would just like stare at her while she was talking. And to me, all those things just growing up, I was like, She yells at me at home. Like, she has no problem being regular. She will throw socks at me, but I'm being terrible. Like, you cannot. This lady, you don't need to treat her special. She is just regular. And so that to me taught me a lot, the fact that like people were so just, everybody tries really hard to be nice. And then those things, it just can become disingenuous sometimes. And so, but to me, I was always like, I'm just going to treat people the way I want to be treated. If somebody disrespects me, I don't have to hate them. I can just set that as my boundary. That's not a person I need to socialize with, and that's okay. And maybe later we'll socialize and maybe not. And that's something that even more so, like, I'm in a family situation. And so my kid's father, we may not have the best relationship, but through all these conflict resolution lessons that I've learned and ways of communicating, there's always something that we have to negotiate. I mean, the kids are going back and forth, and at the end of the day, in my mind, the best thing I can do is at least show the girls that no matter what kinds of arguments that we might have or disagreements, I still have to treat them like a person. I treat them like a person, and this is what it is. It's, you almost to a point, even in those times, have to keep it very HR, and you just have to be like, well, this is my goal. Do you want to work? No? Okay. Because there are some relationships you really can't get out of, whether you want to or not. And sure, you can get a divorce, but there's a big like exhaustion and going and arguing all the time. It's just draining. You can't focus at work when you're stuck in some sort of like emotional family dilemma. So it's
interesting.
Yeah.
How you mentioned that of not only for the other person, but empathy also protects you then too. And having those boundaries also helps you not to overinvest in the conflict. Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. Now, as far as equating that to actual doing and feeling, as you say that, how have you found ways to actually bring that into real life? Because that's a challenge to actually take the principles that you're talking about and then actually feel them, not just believe them and not just know that they're right and feel good about them, but actually feel it and do it. Do you know what I mean? Have you found like insights about that?
I mean, I've just had to even vulnerable to even my own kids, hey, out with this, let me share with you, what I'm struggling with. And sometimes I just reach out to my family and my boyfriend or anybody, and I'll just say, hey, I need cuddles. Like, I just need hugs. There's just, sometimes you just can't get away from something actually hurting. And so what my resort is now, like, I immediately go to, hey, I just need somebody to hold me. It doesn't mean that the pain is gone. It just makes it to where it's not as lonely. And so even if I didn't have that, even if I, didn't have that support in my mind, it's to get it out, even writing it down. There was a time where, I just lose my patience because I was trying to like, keep it together. And even just, I was in the process of learning all this stuff. And so for me, it was more like, I thought that even in the discussions or the arguments, I was like, well, that's, I had that thing of like, it's not fair. And then that translated to something else when I wrote it down. I was like, okay, I had a point where I wrote, okay, well, it's not fair, but it affects other people around me in this way. To see me hurt like that, it affects my own health. It affects my own, day to day after that. And so just seeing all those things, writing them down, then you go and it almost, for me at least, it like fueled me to go, well, I don't have to let these things like kick me down all the time. I try to thrive on being creative and trying to figure out like a way of seeing how my emotions can be turned into like a learning experience, so that if somebody else is going through that, what would I tell my friend? That's kind of how I always try to see it, because we don't tend to treat ourselves like we treat other people, unfortunately. And so we tend to best foot forward for others, but when you see yourself like kind of like the little kids that we still are inside, it's almost like, hey, like, no, this is not the only way that it should be. How do you want it to be? Well, in my mind, then I started being like, well, I could just be empathetic and carry myself that way, and hopefully if people respond well, good. And if they don't, like I told you, I can't take offense to it because they haven't evolved to that point to where they feel empathy. Maybe they're still struggling with something that's out of my control. Just, I guess, learning that it's not under you all the time.
It's powerful when you can do it. And it is interesting. You mentioned like even the process of taking offense, right, is something that is more focused back on us, right, and our own feelings. And so that's a powerful thing. You're talking about that empathy as a protection, a self-protection as well then. Which I wonder, do you find that then supplants the need for or relieves some of the anxiety then? Because if anxiety is all about protecting ourselves, right, from that vulnerability, you're talking about empathy being almost a replacement, more healthy protection, it sounds like.
Yeah, just because, at least, like I said, I have never been able to avoid talking to people in general because I had jobs that required it.
Sure,
and so just not taking things personal, because knowing that everybody care about something, but carrying that with you is super important on the day to day, just because we don't know. We just honestly don't know. As I mentioned, like, my life had been in church, and I've met people who are in church because they had serious problems from pedophilia, from drug addiction, from all kinds of stuff. And it's not that it's condoned, but it's the fact that everybody at least wants to fix themselves in a way, and everybody's trying some way. And I guess that minimizes the anxiety from a perspective of, I don't have to be afraid of what people think if I'm always talking with empathy being my first thing.
Yeah. It's like a form of faith in and of itself, because you're having faith in the other people too. Like you said, you're believing. If it reminds me in a way of when I worked at a substance abuse program years ago, and one of the counselors that I worked with there was talking about the way he approached things, and I was new to that. I'd worked around addiction here and there, but that was all we did, right? So it was a whole new experience for me. And this one counselor that was talking to me, and he said, so you're going to hear a lot of people who approach it this way or that way. And a lot of our clientele were also worked with the courts, let's say, that had charges and things. And he said, by the time someone gets into our offices, they're bruised, they're banged up, they've been kicked around their whole lives, and nobody believes anything they say, and everybody thinks the worst of them. He said, so I've decided that if someone comes in and sits down next to my desk here, I'm going to believe him, and I'm going to listen to them. And if they tell me they want to get better, I'm going to say, all right, that means you want to get better. And he said, then that there's so many people that were part of that system, and the probation, and unfortunately, even a lot of the mental health professionals, who get caught up in I don't want to be made a fool of. I don't want to be tricked. Right. And he said, I'd much rather be tricked. I'd much rather be wrong. And be wrong in some cases if someone wanted to be, to lie, than to say and he believed most, than to have most people walking in here trying to be sincere and walking out getting hurt for it and not being rewarded for their vulnerability, Right.
Yeah, at least even for that person, that could have been the truth at that time, but because of bad discipline or lack of education, they couldn't make the right choice consistently. That brings me to a different point. So this is because of my blended family, because of all those different discussions, I couldn't walk away from having those difficult conversations. So I started taking mediation classes. Those really helped me because even through my own divorce, I didn't go through a normal litigation process. I went through a conflict mediation specialist that was able to help both parents compromise to what worked without being like, no, they're my children or your child. Like, I didn't want that argument, because you see that a lot, and that's just endless amounts of money going to some random person that doesn't really care. Sure. And the court system can really, I don't like that a lot of fathers lose, custody of their kids based on paying money for your kids. Like, to me, that's all. I've never appreciated that. Because there's so many different ways of handling it, I guess, in compromise, but it's the lack of communication that people decide that their anger or their resentment is more important. And so that's something that I learned in the mediation class, is that I, as a mediator, can't think that one is guiltier than the other. I have to help them both equally. And so
Yeah.
I do have to believe them both, that if one person is saying, well, I'm suffering because of this, or they did this to me, I have to say that that happened, and I can't empathize with one more than the other. I can just create an opportunity for both of them to speak their mind in a vulnerable, safe way. And that to me made a huge impact, because there was a lot of times, even in my own
Yeah.
life, because of religion, because of whatever, I didn't feel safe, saying my opinion. But for me to be able to create that for people and to say, let's take a moment to really discuss this, or because I'm a third party, I can definitely stop them from being mean to each other. That's part of the opening, to say, hey, we're not going to use bad words. We're not going to insult each other. We're just going to state the facts. And we're only going to talk about myself, me state. Don't say you, don't say this. That's something that I can incorporate in mediation. And that's really cool
Yeah.
for me that I learned that, because people don't operate that way in any scenario. Everybody's
True.
like, you. And
Right.
it's very hard to want to cooperate, or, you know, work with somebody that's blaming you for stuff. It's very hard. So just
It's
removing that.
it's really a cool thing to say, and that was something you just sort of were investigating for its own purposes. It sounds like not. Do you do that kind of work now? Do you do mediation?
Yeah, I mean, I still haven't like put up a practice or anything, but
Yeah.
I'm done with my courses and everything. I went through the test. And so for me, it was more so to learn how to navigate my own, situation
Yeah.
with shared custody of my kids. Cause I want my kids to have, their parents in their life, because I grew up with my grandparents. I really didn't grow up with my parents. And ironically, it taught me all those lessons, but I want my kids to have the opportunity that I didn't, which was I never knew the mental health repercussions of seeing my biological parents. I never met my biological mom. And after I learned about her, it sounded like she suffered a lot from mental health issues. From the little things that I've heard of her, she was okay being really, really violent, like pulling people out of cars and beating them up. And so in my
Wow.
mind, if I would
Yeah.
have known that, I would have not wondered why it was like I used to get bullied in high school and in junior high, and people would like come and try to fight me. And I never lost a fight, but I never knew why I was so good at fighting. So I was always like, why
Yeah.
do I like this so much? I don't understand. Because my grandma and my grandpa were not like that.
Yeah.
They were not like wanting to. And so to me, I was like, there's something off about me. I don't get it. But it was unfortunately, I guess, that whole, that genetic thing that I missed out on, because I didn't meet her. I didn't know about her. I had no awareness of her behavior. And so for me, even though I may not agree with the way that my kid's father, raises them or does anything, I can still agree that it's going to be a learning experience for my kids to be around how he behaves as a person, because they might behave that way when they're older. And so that'll give them a reference point.
And what it would have been like to be able to know what that was at an earlier stage, right? And being able to use that information. Do you feel like that learning those things about your mom plays a role in the way that you try to sort of preach mental health awareness and things like that? Or was that already something that you had already been into before you found out those things?
Well, I was aware that I like, that tension between people or conflict or all of those things. And when I heard about how it was, or just got a glimpse of the person that she put out there, then I realized that it was very important for me not only to educate myself, but to go and get myself checked, to go and get myself educated around, was it just like a behavior that I had? Was it just PMSing, or am I like chemically imbalanced actually? And should I really be investing my time into talking to a therapist? Because, you don't know that if it's just a mood, like I said it before, if it's just a mood or if it's an actual thing that you need to do on. And there were times that as I was getting older, it wasn't like I was just having a day. It was like, no, I can't, like this feeling away. And I wouldn't have looked into it as much, because at that, when I learned about I was going through course, I was going through all kinds of stuff. So anything could have been, impacting me. Anything could have been causing me to be sad, and just that phase of my life. was not as lucky to know about all this stuff when I had my kids, and I went through like postpartum depression. I would just sleep a lot. I just didn't really do a lot. I wasn't very I didn't do like I probably didn't shower for like weeks because I just didn't know. I thought in my mind, I'm just being here for this person. They were just born. I have to pay attention to it, and I fell in there without having a healthy balance of it. I was like I told you, 18, and all those things because it wasn't talked about in my family. It wasn't really promoted to go and get help for those things. They were just get up and go do it, or go get a job, or go figure it out. And that's kind of a band-aid way of, trying to get yourself together without professional help.
Right. And that's a big part. I'm a big advocate of that, I will say, as somebody who I received the diagnosis of bipolar disorder after I reached adulthood, after I had been working in mental health, after I became a therapist, all of those things. So don't think you can do it yourself as far as that awareness. You need that outside help from other people, even if you think you should know something like or whatever. So I'm definitely great thing. So tell everybody a little bit about where they can find your work, about the podcast, and just other ways they can connect with you.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and that's my biggest thing. Is just I put all of my art there. It's called Arte de Abi, so it's just in Spanish, ARTEDEABI. But I post all my podcast stuff there, my doodles, my everything, and then from my Instagram it just goes out to whatever other streams that I have, and my podcast shows on most popular forms of stream. But Instagram is one of my big ones because my big thing is to try to promote all this stuff for free. Like I haven't really invested any into it, and that's kind of why I want to champion free mental health. And so there's a lot of other people like you that are wanting to put this information out there, and I forward other people's information. I have little blocks of data on how to, get educated on those things, on better habits in general. I share a lot of stuff of my favorite authors that have helped me, learn new perspectives. So I try to not only do my own content because I'm not my only resource, but I want to promote other people that are very, interested in just the topics and just being more vulnerable. So all of that stuff I share out there, and I'm always happy to share more. So
it's powerful stuff. I think you're doing really great work in getting it out there. Anything that has to do with empathy and with being able to talk to each other more and better. For some reason nowadays, it seems even more important. It just seems like it's a big thing that people are struggling with being able to do for lots of reasons. So thank you so much for coming to talk about it and for being here, and just for the stuff that you're doing in general as well. So I'm going to tell everybody, head over to the Instagram for sure, and make sure to listen to the Friends of Friends podcast as well. It's really great. I was lucky to find out who you were so I could start listening to it.
Thanks.
So, we have we did have a comment from somebody who wanted to share from Wilma Monroe. Thanks for sharing that. Not show till they're older. My late mother suffered depression for years, but would not talk about it. And I put it together myself. I take that. You had to figure that out, right? For yourself. And that's something that I think does happen, where we get things later on that we put in a whole different context, don't we? When we're able to look at it, sometimes the whole relationship.
A lot of times, nothing clicked until I was a parent, because why would I don't want to treat my kids this way, or I don't want to judge them that much. So it definitely is a puzzle that unfortunately we have to put together later, grow up, because we don't feel comfortable doing that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Wilma, for sharing that with us today while we were talking about it. So let me say for everybody out there that's hearing this, whether you're hearing this on the podcast feed or whether you watching with us now or watching the video afterwards, just want to encourage everybody to go out there and find the cool things that are out there to blow your mind, break your brain around. And as always, let me know what they are. If there's other things that you'd like us to know about and talk about on the show, you can tweet at breakabrain. That's just one word, that's how Twitter works. I review that every time because so few people understand social media, I guess. No, just because maybe I don't. So share that. And as always, the show here We're a part of the Core Temp Arts network of podcasts. Really glad to be a part of that. You can go to coretemparts.com and learn more about our sister shows and things. And and one quick note from Wilma. Thank you very much also, Wilma, for listening. It's been really nice to have you along too with us today. So from all of us, thank you very much for being here, for listening. And thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Dwight.
Have a great day.